You ever had one of those neighbors who just can't mind their own business? Well, mine took it to a whole new level. She wasn't just nosy or annoying, she was straight up destructive. And the worst part? She had a personal vendetta against my mailbox. Yeah, you heard that right. A mailbox. The first time it happened, I shrugged it off. Maybe it was an accident. A drunk driver? A careless kid? I didn't think much of it. So I replaced it. Simple fix. But then it happened again. And again. And after the fourth time, I knew this wasn't bad luck. Someone was doing it on purpose. At first, I couldn't wrap my head around it. Who gets this mad at a mailbox? What did my poor little metal box ever do to deserve this? I started paying closer attention, and that's when I noticed a pattern. The damage always seemed to happen at odd hours of the night, and it was always just my mailbox. My neighbors' mailboxes? Perfectly fine. Something was up. I wasn't about to let it slide this time. If someone wanted to keep messing with me, they were in for a surprise. Karen wasn't just a bad neighbor. She was a nightmare. The kind of person who acted like the whole neighborhood was her personal kingdom, and everyone else was just living in it. She had something to say about everything. If your grass was a little too long, she'd leave a note. If your trash cans weren't brought in the second the garbage truck left, she'd call the HOA. If you parked in her spot on a public street, get ready for a full-blown meltdown. I had dealt with her passive-aggressive nonsense before, but the mailbox situation was on another level. The first time it got knocked over, I didn't think much of it. Maybe a delivery guy misjudged the curb. Maybe some kids were messing around. Annoying? Yes, but not worth making a big deal over. So I put up a new one and moved on. Then, a few weeks later, it happened again. Same exact thing. Mailbox broken, post bent, mail scattered all over the driveway. Weird, right? But maybe it was still a coincidence. Stuff happens. I replaced it again, a little sturdier this time. But then it kept happening. Every few weeks, like clockwork, my mailbox was wrecked. The post snapped clean off, dents that looked like someone had taken a bat to it. And no one else's mailboxes were touched, just mine. That's when I started getting suspicious. And the worst part? Karen had this smug little attitude every time I mentioned it. I wasn't outright accusing her yet, but whenever I talked about how weird it was, she'd hit me with the same fake sympathy. Oh no, again? That's just awful. But she always had this weird look in her eyes, like she knew something I didn't. At first, I tried to ignore it. But then, the other little things started adding up. Karen would gossip about me to other neighbors, acting like I was causing problems just for existing. She'd make comments about my house, my car, even the way I trimmed my hedges. And she always had this tone, like she was the queen of the street and I was some outsider ruining her perfect little world. But the mailbox was what pushed me over the edge. It wasn't just annoying, it was personal, and I was done letting her get away with it. At this point, I was beyond frustrated. I had replaced my mailbox so many times that I started keeping spare parts in my garage. But without proof, I couldn't do anything. Maybe it was some reckless teenager. Maybe it was just bad luck. But deep down, I had a feeling Karen was behind this, so I decided to stop guessing. I installed a security camera facing my front yard. Not just for Karen, there had been some minor thefts in the neighborhood, so it was a good excuse. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even my closest neighbors. I wanted to see what was really going on. And sure enough, it didn't take long before I caught something insane on camera. It was Karen. Middle of the night. Flowery robe, slippers, and a flashlight. She wasn't sneaky about it either. She marched right up to my mailbox like it had personally insulted her family, raised her leg, and kicked it with full force. When that didn't do enough damage, she tried again, 2 hands gripping the post, yanking like she was in a wrestling match. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. Who gets this mad at a mailbox? I sat there, mouth open, watching this woman wage a personal war against a metal box. At one point, she pulled out a hammer and started whacking the side of it like she was breaking into a safe. This wasn't just random vandalism. This was personal. And just when I thought it couldn't get any crazier, she tripped over her own slipper, stumbled back, and landed flat on her butt. I had to pause the video because I was laughing so hard. She scrambled up, brushed herself off, looked around like a guilty cartoon villain, and then stomped back to her house like nothing happened. So now I had proof. I could call the cops, report her for vandalism, maybe even get her to pay for all the damage. But the more I thought about it, the less satisfying that seemed. What would happen? A warning? A fine? She'd probably just play the victim and make my life even more miserable. No, I needed something better. I sat there, staring at the broken mailbox, thinking. If Karen wanted to keep smashing my property, maybe it was time to give her a real challenge. Something that would make her regret every single kick. And that's when the perfect idea hit me. Now that I knew for sure Karen was the one behind all the mailbox destruction, I had two choices. I could go the boring route, call the cops, report the vandalism, maybe even take her to small claims court. But where's the fun in that? A fine or a warning wouldn't stop her. If anything, it would just make her more annoying. No, I needed something better. Something that would make her regret every single time she set foot near my mailbox. So, I started planning. I looked up ways to make a mailbox indestructible. First thought? Concrete. Solid choice, but too basic. Plus, if she managed to hit it hard enough with a bat or a car, it might still crack. Then I considered an electric shock system, but yeah, that's probably illegal. After way too much research, I finally found the perfect solution. A reinforced titanium mailbox, mounted into a concrete base with a steel post buried deep into the ground. This thing wasn't just tough. It was unstoppable. I ordered the materials and spent an entire weekend setting it up. First, I dug deep into the ground, making sure the post would be nearly impossible to move. Then, I mixed and poured several bags of concrete, securing the post so firmly that it might as well have been part of the earth itself. Finally, I installed the titanium mailbox, which looked completely normal. But this thing was built like a tank. It wasn't going anywhere. As I was finishing up, I noticed Karen driving by. She slowed down, her eyes narrowing as she took in what I was doing. I could almost see the gears turning in her head. She knew something was up. But she didn't know what. I pretended not to notice her. Just kept adjusting the mailbox, tapping it like I was making sure it was just right. But inside, I was dying. Because I knew, deep down, that she was going to try again. And this time, she was in for a very painful surprise. It didn't take long. Just a few nights after installing my indestructible mailbox, Karen came creeping back like some kind of suburban cryptid, ready for her usual routine. I was already expecting her, so I had my security camera rolling, capturing every second of her next big mistake. Same as before, she showed up in the middle of the night, robe and slippers, flashlight in hand like she was about to break into a vault. Except this time, she had no idea what she was up against. She did her usual check, looking left and right to make sure no one was watching. Then she took a deep breath, pulled her leg back, and kicked the mailbox with everything she had. Bad idea. Instead of bending or snapping like before, the solid titanium box didn't even budge. Karen, on the other hand? She stumbled back instantly, her foot colliding with pure metal and concrete. The moment her slipper made contact, she let out this loud yelp, lost her balance, and landed flat on the pavement. And the best part? Her flashlight went flying. It tumbled out of her hand, rolling across the sidewalk like a horror movie prop, flickering a few times before coming to a dramatic stop. For a second, she just laid there, groaning in pain, probably trying to figure out if she had just broken something. Meanwhile, I was sitting comfortably inside, sipping my coffee, watching the whole thing unfold on my security feed. And let me tell you, it was beautiful. Every time I replayed the footage, it just got funnier. Karen eventually dragged herself off the ground, grabbed her flashlight, and limped away as fast as she could. No dramatic exit, no last-minute act of defiance, just pure humiliation. And that's when I knew she would never mess with my mailbox again. The next morning, I stepped outside to grab my mail, pretending like nothing had happened. But guess who I saw across the street? Karen. Sitting on her porch, ice pack on her foot, arms crossed, scowling at the world. She was furious, but instead of admitting she'd lost, she did what Karens do best. She played the victim. I could tell she was trying to act like nothing happened, but every time she moved, she winced. She was in pain, and she knew exactly why. I figured she'd finally learned her lesson, that this was the end of it. I was wrong. Instead of letting it go, Karen decided to take it to the next level. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail Karen was suing me. I almost laughed out loud. The claim? That my mailbox was a dangerous structure and that I had intentionally set a trap to cause her harm. She actually hired a lawyer to argue that I was at fault for her breaking her own foot on my property. I couldn't wait to see how this played out. Courtroom showdown. The day of the hearing, I walked in feeling completely calm. But Karen? Oh, she was ready for an Oscar. She limped in dramatically, leaning on a cane, acting like she had been brutally attacked. Her lawyer was just as ridiculous, going on about how no normal mailbox should be able to cause this level of injury, and that I had maliciously reinforced it with the intent to harm. Then it was my turn. I didn't need to say much. I just pulled out my USB drive and handed it to the judge. Security footage doesn't lie. As soon as the video started playing, the whole room went silent. There she was, in full high-definition glory, stalking my mailbox like it owed her money, kicking it with full force, and then falling like a sack of potatoes. The moment she hit the ground, I swear I heard someone in the courtroom choke back a laugh. The judge turned to Karen, raising an eyebrow. So, just to clarify, you injured yourself by kicking someone else's property, and you're trying to blame him for that? Karen stammered. Her lawyer fumbled for words, but it was over. Case dismissed. She had officially lost. And the best part? The judge even warned her that if she pulled something like this again, she could be facing charges for harassment. I walked out of that courtroom with the biggest grin. Karen? She hobbled out, defeated, and from that day on, she never touched my mailbox again. You'd think after losing in court, Karen would finally back off. But no, she wasn't done. Instead of accepting defeat, she pulled one last desperate move, a neighborhood petition to get my mailbox removed. Yeah, a petition. Over a mailbox, she went door to door, limping like some tragic war hero, complaining about how my dangerous structure was a threat to the community. She tried to convince people that if my mailbox could break her foot, then it could hurt their kids, their pets, or even destroy their cars. But here's the thing. Karen had made a lot of enemies. She had spent years annoying everyone on the block, complaining about noise, calling HOA over tiny things, leaving nasty notes on people's doors. Nobody actually liked her, so instead of signing her petition, my neighbors did something better. They started their own petition to remove her. It started as a joke, but the more people heard about it, the more they wanted her gone. The final straw? Karen had wasted HOA's time with a ridiculous lawsuit and a fake safety complaint. That was enough for them to call an emergency meeting. HOA showdown. The meeting was packed. Karen showed up, expecting to have a whole army of support behind her. But instead, she walked into a room full of people who were sick of her nonsense. When the HOA president read out her petition, people rolled their eyes. But when he read out the petition to kick her out, I swear you could hear a pin drop. Karen's face turned bright red. She tried to argue, but every single person in that room had a story about how awful she was. The noise complaints, the spying, the passive-aggressive notes, the mailbox incident. And in the end, the vote was unanimous. Karen was officially kicked out of the neighborhood. Sweet, sweet victory. A month later, I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the best show of my life. Karen moving out. She was furious, slamming boxes into her car, grumbling the whole time. But there was nothing she could do. She got in her car, gave my mailbox one last death glare, and then sped off, never to be seen again. And as for my mailbox, still standing, stronger than ever. Looking back, it's honestly ridiculous how far this all went. All this over a mailbox. If Karen had just minded her own business, she could have lived a peaceful life. But no, she had to pick a fight she couldn't win. And in the end, the right person had to leave. She tried smashing my mailbox. She tried suing me. She even tried rallying the neighborhood against me. And where did that get her? Evicted. Meanwhile, my indestructible mailbox is still standing strong, just like the day I installed it. Karen? Not so much. It's funny how people like her think they can control everything until they run into someone who won't back down. If she had just left me alone, we both could have gone on with our lives. But instead, she played stupid games and won the ultimate prize, a one-way ticket out of the neighborhood. And honestly, I couldn't have planned a better ending if I tried. So, what about you? Have you ever had to deal with an entitled neighbor like Karen? Drop your stories in the comments, I'd love to hear them.